The next segment is introducing the MEGA Alliance, Mobilizing Earth Governance Alliance. So we're going to have two members from the steering committee for MEGA. The first one is Maja Groff. She is a convener for the Climate Governance Commission as well. She is a co-winner of the International New Shape Prize on Global Governance Innovation, an international lawyer, senior treaty advisor, Integrity Initiatives International, and co-founder of the Global Governance Forum. With her, we will be having John Vlasto, who is based in London, UK, and joined the WFMIGP Executive Committee in 2021. He is increasingly concerned that humanity is not looking after its planet. He returned to university to study global politics at the London School of Economics. He now works with fellow activists to realize the vision of a sustainable, just, and peaceful world through more effective and accountable global governance. So with that being said, I'll pass it on to you.
There you are.
Thanks. It wasn't allowing me to unmute myself there. And I'll share my screen, shall I, Erica, with the PowerPoint? Just trying to get it to start. Wonderful. Okay, thank you, everybody. Lovely to be here with you. I'm joining you now from northern Sweden in the snow. So I hope my internet connection holds. It should. But as mentioned, John and I today will be introducing the Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance, which is a global civil society and stakeholder coalition that we're just getting up and running around the world across all regions. And I'll first be sharing a little bit about the Climate Governance Commission, as MEGA really comes out organically of the work of the Climate Governance Commission, which was initiated back in late 2019. So the Climate Governance Commission, our reports, what is MEGA, and then John will take over in terms of what we hope will be the impact of the Mobilizing Earth Governance. Yeah, can the host make sure that I have I'm able to unmute myself and stay unmuted, just so we don't have any other interruptions? That would be great. So, Climate Governance Commission. This is a snapshot from one of our key meetings last June in the Villers Institute in Switzerland, bringing together commissioners from our high-level phase of the Climate Governance Commission, where we invited former heads of state, ambassadors, policy experts from different regions in the world that are advising governments around the world, on the African continent, in India and Brazil. You see here in this photo a picture of the permanent representative of the Maldives, United Nations, also my colleague from the Institute of New Economic Thinking in New York, from Sri Lanka originally, Mary Robinson, chair of the Elders, former president of Ireland, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, previously president of the UN General Assembly. So we're really trying to engage in the work of the Climate Governance Commission, which, as I said, was from late 2019 until now, and it's ongoing. Statespeople and thought leaders from around the world. You see also one of our youth representatives and commissioners in this photo, where we're really trying to develop material, new approaches, taking the vantage point of international governance, global governance, to actually tackle properly and effectively the climate challenge and the broader planetary emergency. So in 2021, we published our interim report, which is still available online. And from a policy and governance perspective, we really sort of tried to hone into a few notable gaps in terms of why we're not where we should be in terms of our climate action. So firstly, solution action gap. We have plenty of solutions with current technology. can tackle the climate challenge, but we're not implementing these solutions at the speed and scale we need to yet. The policy gap. Most jurisdictions are still reinventing the wheel in terms of not learning from each other. They also do not yet, in general, have adequate policies to really stay in alignment with the Paris Agreement and the current science. And then lastly, the governance gap. There is a very fundamental international governance gap where our governance is very, very weak still at the international level to tackle the gravity of the challenges we face, which I'll talk about in a moment. And this is really why MEGA is so important, building this smart coalition, building a platform where we can really raise awareness about this key international governance gap, which should connect to all the levels of governance, also regional, national, local. And this is just a sample of some of the policy papers that the Climate Governance Commission has published, in particular in its phase one, more technical phase, where we looked at, for example, the history of proposals for global environment agencies or world environment organizations in the scientific literature, academic literature. What have been the proposals and what could be the key features of a new global environment agency, as many scientists and others have suggested. And there's a whole host of other areas we've done thinking and research on from this global governance and global governance innovation lens. I won't go through them at the moment just because we're limited in terms of our time. So the commissioners, as I mentioned, chaired by Mary Robinson, first female president of Ireland. And you see a list also to the right of other commissioners. Johan Rockstrom, noted planetary scientist. And we really try to get a full cross section as much as possible within the limitations of numbers for commissioners of humanity. You see, we have a Chinese, a wonderful commissioner from China based in Beijing. We have another youth Commissioner Chido Mapemba, who's the youth envoy for the African Union. Nobuo Tanaka, who's a Japanese commissioner, who's former head of the International Energy Agency. So really, we think that we need to put our heads together at a very high level to think very seriously about improving international environmental and climate governance. And just to underline and emphasize, this inflection point in human history that we feel that we're at, which has been underlined by the UN Secretary General. He's suggesting in this quote, this is from his 2021 report, Our Common Agenda, we're facing our biggest shared test since the Second World War. I would argue that we are facing a challenge which is in many ways greater and bigger than World War Two, because it's really about our basic planetary life support systems, which is a novel challenge. We need to use the latest science, the latest technology, the latest thinking together with indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, local knowledge to get our arms around this challenge. And we really have to involve every region of the world and get international cooperation right. So it's a massive challenge. So, what does the science tell us in terms of this crossroads in human history? So, I think somebody had shared the planetary boundaries framework slide earlier today, and I'm resharing it because it's so vitally important. Also, to show, you see climate is one of the planetary boundaries, but it's interdependent, very closely interdependent with a number of the other planetary boundaries. For example, land system change, ocean indicators, just as two among others, biodiversity. So if we're going to tackle the climate challenge, we need to tackle a whole host of other global ecological issues. And, moreover, have as a key reference point, we've been arguing this planetary boundaries framework where we need to stay in this safe operating space, the green area you see in this chart. And we've overstepped, unfortunately, 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. So we need to think in very different ways about the necessary planetary governance that will actually be effective to get us back into that green area. So this requires a lot of imagination, entrepreneurship in terms of our thinking, in terms of, how we engage with diplomatic processes, how we engage experts, how we get experts thinking in line with the most current and up-to-date science, which is system science. All these different pieces interact with each other. So to this end, we published a major report in November, the end of November, just before COP28, and it's available online. It's easy to find. And the goal was really to put together a list of priority international governance reforms and improvements. We have a top 10 near-term proposals and then 5 medium-term upgrades that we've sketched out in the report. And this report is really an outcome and consolidation of the work we've been doing since late 2019, talking to countless experts, stakeholders, civil society across every region of the world. This is a slide with the top 10 near-term proposals that we're going to be now working on. I won't go through all of them, but I would just underline that all of these are important, and there are probably more because this is such a profound, all-encompassing kind of challenge, the ecological crises that we're facing, you know, they really cross-cut across all sorts of different various policy areas. So, for example, trade and finance, our global economic, financial architecture, the levels of indeed international finance we need to tackle the climate and planetary emergency. So this is why we have, this array of 10 different tracks we think are very important. You'll see at the end, business needs to go through a fundamental systemic change as key actors, powerful actors in the international system. Cities are also absolutely crucial. Then if you look at, kind of 1, 2, 3, there are more 4 classical international governance issues: urgently improve the COPs to be more results-based, outcome-focused, to declare a planetary emergency by the General Assembly, for enhance international scientific capacity for full Earth system governance. Right now it's fragmented. We're really flying blind, in fact, as an international community with respect to all of the planetary boundaries. And then I'll just mention some of the medium-term proposals, as I referred to before: Global Environment Agency to consolidate really fragmented and weak international environmental governance, International Court for the Environment, which we have already. There's a group of lawyers, citizens, others who are working in a coalition for an International Court for the Environment, and some other sort of major international system reforms. And just to close and to end, I also had a slide again of all of humanity in one composite face. that this is really our challenge, and this is really what Mega hopes to do: is how do we bring humanity together at this point, at this juncture, this key juncture in our history, to really realize the urgency, the gravity of protecting our common home. This is a slide from Common Home of Humanity, which is an organization based in Portugal, around the world, with cross-disciplinary experts, which shows really the software of the Earth, those planetary boundaries, the biophysical systems that keep us safe, all of humanity safe on Earth. So this is our task. It's planetary. We have to understand the science, and then we have to mobilize to make sure the proper governance comes into place. So I'll stop there and turn over to you, John, and I can change the slides if you wish for you, if you just tell me when to change them, if you prefer.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you also to the organizer of the conference. And Maya did warn me on her way to snowy northern Sweden that she might not get to her destination on time, and I may need to cover her side of the presentation for her. So I'm very glad she spoke to the last slide, because I had no idea what that was about, and now I know. So thank you, Maya. I should start my presentation by pointing out that MAGA actually stands for Making Earth Great Again. This is a post-MAGA movement, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're back to the agenda slide. Technically, we've covered 2 out of 5 agenda points, but I can reassure you we are more than 2/5 of the way through the presentation. So by way of introducing my comments, before getting directly into Mega, I'll just tell the story of where Mega came from, what motivated me to get involved in this. So before I was a World Federalist, I was just wondering what to do next in my life. And I was thinking what bothers me. And what bothers me is that humanity is not taking good care of the planet. And this is so obviously monumentally stupid. You just think, what on earth is going on? And with no background in politics whatsoever, you sort of rapidly come to the conclusion global politics doesn't work. It wasn't built to deal with this actual real problem. It was built not to bother the P5 too much. So from there, I went back to university as a very mature student and touched on global politics in a master's, and came across Andreas Bummel's wonderful work and the UNPA proposal. And I thought, well, Andreas is a guy who seems to talk sense. So I asked him what I could do to help him. I started working with him on the UNPA campaign. And what I found talking to people is that if you're a governance geek, then UNPA is very exciting. But for the man in the street, it's quite difficult to translate it into language that's appealing. And it sort of took me back to my roots. I didn't start this work because I thought, oh, the world needs a parliamentary assembly. I got involved because we're trashing our planet and it's stupid and we need to stop it, and we need to stop it urgently. And that framing of what we're trying to do, let's address an urgent problem. On that basis, I went to COP26 in Glasgow 2 years ago. There I had an introduction to Maja from Andreas. So I chatted to Maja and found she was already 2 years into her work on putting together this governance report. And so I suggested, as a brand new chair of the World Federalist Movement with really no clue whatsoever, that WFM built smart coalitions. That's what we do. So we'd build a coalition to implement the recommendations of her report. So that's what Mega is. That's where it comes from. So yes, next slide, please, Maja. Okay, so this is the Mega website. And I mean, a lot of the people who have presented today are all deeply involved in this, more so than I am. So Alan Ware built this website. Rebecca Shute and Maja Groff are the two other co-hosts of this project. It's the World Federalist Movement, Citizens for Global Solutions, and the Climate Governance Commission are the co-hosts of this project. So Alan built this website. What is Mega? Strengthening global governance to protect the environment. That's exactly what it is. And in a little more detail there, that's essentially the mission of the program. So Mega is a coalition of civil society organizations working in cooperation with like-minded governments and other stakeholders to strengthen environmental governance. So the URL for the website is in the top right. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's earthgovernance.org, and you'll find all sorts of information about the program on that website, which is in development. This is the first iteration. It will continue to develop.
The link is also in the chat for those interested.
Thank you, Erica. Next slide, please. What this slide shows schematically is how Mega is looking to translate the proposals from the Climate Governance Commission report via smart coalitions into actual changes to global governance. So one thing I noted when Maja very kindly invited me to her commissioners' meetings is that the commissioners are uniformly extremely keen that their report isn't just a report sitting on a shelf. They're involved because they see the urgent need for action and they want to see the report turned into action. And so that's where Mega sits, turning the recommendations into action. And the smart coalition technology is the next slide. I'll come to that in a moment. But you'll see here a number of recommendations from the report. So there are something like 30 proposals on the website and half a dozen campaigns. You can look at the website, what's there. Just to pick up the first couple here, establishing a global environment agency. We've talked about that a couple of times. The idea of such an agency is it would have deliberative and legislative functions. Well, that immediately makes me think of a parliament. And there you see establishing a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly. That is more than a proposal in that it's a long-standing campaign. And that, again, is part of Mega. And Maja ran through the 10 short-term and 5 medium-term highlight proposals from the report. All of that is part of what Mega is trying to promote. Next slide, please. So this is the smart coalition strategy. Just stepping back for a moment to how all these proposals tie together. If you imagine the United Nations with a deliberative and legislative World Assembly, with a General Assembly, which we already have, representing the states, and a Parliamentary Assembly, which we talked about many times, representing the people. And that should be a familiar structure to those of you living in Canada or the United States, for example. And then around that World Assembly, you have a number of councils, the Security Council, and also a new Environment Council, or Global Environment Agency, or a Resilience Council, call it what you will. And alongside that, courts like International Court for the Environment, and then we have a lot of lawyers on this call who can debate whether that should be a new court or a chamber of the ICJ, or I have no clue. One can envisage a structure for global governance that's perfectly coherent. We have examples around the world already. It would be a lot more effective than what we have now. That's kind of where we're trying to go. Now, these smart coalitions, this is from a paper, it's mentioned here. I don't even know how you pronounce Boutelard, but Boutelard and Poncio's Smart Coalitions paper from around about 2017. This was a paper saying what's actually worked to change global governance over the last 20 years. And the answer they came up with was that these, what they term smart coalitions of state and non-state actors, can actually impact the world. It isn't theory, it isn't reports sitting on shelves. Governance is strengthened. And one of the two key examples they gave was the International Criminal Court. And as many of you on this call will know, the World Federalist movement took a leading role in putting together the coalition for the International Criminal Court that resulted in its creation. So WFM has form here. We've done this work before. Another example given was the Mine Ban Treaty, which was another coalition that had an impact on the world. So the very simple thinking that went into the foundation of this mega project between Maja and myself was Maja's already doing all this wonderful work with the commission and the report, and Maja will simply apply this smart coalition technology that we've used before to implement the proposals. Next slide, please. Oh, this is embarrassing. I didn't prepare this presentation, I hasten to add. I wouldn't put in a quote from myself. It is an excellent quotation, of course, and it kind of nicely summarizes what Maja and I have been talking about. So at root, it's not an environmental crisis. Humanity's created a global governance crisis. Resolve this and we can unite to live in harmony with each other and with nature. And that's very much the theme of world federalism. I think an important point here is humanity's created a global governance crisis. It's not like some external event that's out of our control and we can do nothing about it. The global governance crisis is of our making. Humanity is perfectly capable. There is no reason that we should not sort this out and come up with governance that makes sense. The Star Trek world, if you will. So that's the big goal. So if you would like to get involved in this process, you can go onto the Mega website, the link in the chat. You can join as an organization, you can reach out. We're building an alliance. If you've got a lot of detailed questions here, I'm not sure if Alan is still on the call. He is the master of the program development here. He's developed such programs before, but we have the 3 co-host organizations already mentioned. We have about 20 co-sponsor organizations on the steering committee, which is meeting on Monday. And then we're just about to have a launch in March and then reach out and build up with participant organizations, reach out to nations, get the environment movement on board and change the world. Next slide, please.
Really, it's just question.
This is questions, but that is a boring slide. And the next slide is more interesting. I have no idea what it's about, but I think we should have the next slide and then questions.
I think this may be Maja's addition to the presentation.
It's cool.
All right, well, you're welcome to stop the screen share if you'd like. We can move to the question and answer period. We'll have lots of time to field questions. So, moment. There we are. Thank you so much for your presentation, for sharing the relationship between the Climate Governance Commission, their report, and MEGA, which I like your Make Earth Great Again, but I also Mobilizing an Earth Governance Commission. So I love that you really clearly shared your strategy for making this happen, smart coalitions. I think maybe to provide a little bit of perspective, do we want to talk a little bit about maybe the coalition for the ICC and the relationship between the World Federalist Movement, this initiative and the processes behind it? What is really behind a smart coalition?
I don't know how much we can reach out to other people on this call, but I know for a fact that Rebecca Shute knows a million times more about the CICC than I do. She's been involved in it for years and years and years. So if Rebecca's on the call, she'd be very welcome to pick up
I would
that question.
happily
There she is. What a relief.
Add spotlight.
Sure. So the CICC came together in 1995 as a group of 25 scrappy civil society organizations and basically put enough exertion and pressure on states to not only will the ICC into being, but to determine many of the thorny questions that we discussed in the earlier panel with regards to the Rome Statute and jurisdiction. Moreover, what I think is probably even more impressive is that it continues today to play a fundamental role in the functioning of this institution, the ICC. Of course, MEGA is bigger than one institution. It embraces a whole panoply of different potential institutions. But today, the CICC constitutes more than 1,000, I think it's more than 1,200 actually, civil society organizations ranging from the hyperlocal to the eminently global. And you cannot contemplate the court's work without it. It convenes we talked about the Assembly of States Parties, and I put in the chat the electoral process, convenes side events from those. It plays a major role in the organization thereof. Roundtables with NGOs that are held in May or June of every year. We're just discussing those that are upcoming. And it helps articulate ongoing questions such as new crimes. We talked about ecocide, questions of procedure, what the qualifications of judges should be. So when we look at a smart coalition, it's, I think, bringing a diverse array of actors together, including civil society at a local level, experts of subject matter, and recognized international organizations to do the thing, establish the thing, and then keep it on track, to be very, very succinct. Was that helpful, John?
Very, yeah. So, I mean, what I'd like to add to that is I could not have given that detail on what Rebecca's just said. And obviously, she's been working there years and knows a whole lot more about it. So the point I wanted to say to supplement what Rebecca's just said is Rebecca's been with CGS for a bit less than a year. Alan's been with the World Federalist Movement as program director for a bit less than a year. I met Maja a couple of years ago. None of these people were working with the World Federalist Movement in any form prior to that. And here we have three incredibly experienced people, each of which knows vastly more about these things than I do, who have come together in WFM, in CGS, working with WFM Canada, because you got also on the steering committee for MEGA. It's a really powerful team of people coming together here with a very important idea for humanity, and it's an incredibly exciting time and an amazing project.
Thank you so much for your response to that question. I know MEGA is relatively new. This question comes from Bob Flax in the chat. Have you had any preliminary dialogues with any of the major environmental organizations? If so, how have they reacted? And maybe if not, what would the presentation of that look like?
Right, so we did with the WWF have a conversation and they were going to come back to us and they haven't yet, and we've chased them once and we're due to chase them again. Obviously, Maja in her work, I'll let Maja speak to this, Maja has been talking to everybody under the sun about environmental governance. And so you see that in the commissioners and you see that in all the reports she refers to. In terms of building the movement, that is the next step in the process, in that we have the co-hosts, we've built the co-sponsors and the steering committee, and the next step is to do the outreach. But that is definitely something that is very much on the agenda. And Maja, let me hand over to you.
Yeah, to answer that question in part and further, yeah, we have already spoken to various representatives, officials, and various large environmental organizations alongside many, smaller organizations, alongside a lot of experts and policy think tanks, also government officials, and yeah, I think it depends on what the organization per se is working in. Many environmental organizations are focused at the national level and still have that orientation. But in some conversations that we've had with some of them, sort of a light bulb comes on and they're like, aha, yes, the international governance. And sort of, kind of remembering actually a lot can be possible at the international level, reminding people of all the smart coalition successes. And also, just connecting with the very, very high levels of frustration amongst many environmental advocates, no matter what level they're working at, is what we're doing at the moment just does not have the clout, it does not have the efficacy to actually tackle the problems. People are very disappointed with the COP processes um, for a whole variety of reasons, backsliding in countries that were going forward, and then um, seeing sort of really chaotic and uneven grappling with the climate challenge and the related ecological challenges. So yes, we've had those conversations, but we want to also really work on refining the proposals, refining the content, and to be very strategic and focused on the various different proposals, um, and then have those discussions with larger environmental organizations where we can join forces so it can be very focused in terms of that, getting that implementation momentum, getting the implementation momentum and dialogue with like-minded states, etc. So all of this has to happen strategically. And I'll just mention also, I mean, there's been the Coalition for the International Criminal Court, which Rebecca mentioned and described very well in terms of its longevity, also in terms of, supporting the ICC on an ongoing basis. But there have been multiple other very successful smart coalitions. For example, the Landmines Treaty, that was an international civil society smart coalition. The coalition for the abolition of nuclear weapons, the treaty adopted in 2017 to ban nuclear weapons. UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities was also an incredible global transnational civil society sort of operation to have that most recent UN Human Rights Treaty, not to mention a number of smart coalitions recently for the advisory opinion at the International Court of Justice, the Ecocide campaign at the ICC, focusing mostly on the ICC, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty with civil society experts around the world, as well as various states. So there are lots of examples. It's an active field, and yeah, there's huge potential if the larger environmental organizations really see if they are indeed frustrated with the current architecture as it is. It's just not yet delivering the results that we need to see. And someone had asked in the chat about the UNFCCC and where's the UNFCCC. If you look at our top 10, the first proposal deals with COP reforms, which of course climate COPs are creatures of the UNFCCC. But we talk about different tweaks and adjustments. How do we make those results focus? But we also propose a very interesting, I think, next step in accountability, monitoring, holding to account of states under current COP processes under the Paris Agreement within the UNFCCC at the moment. So we're focusing on that, absolutely. People should be pushing as hard as they can under that current architecture, but we will also, there's almost no doubt that we're also going to have very significant action across multitude of different international policy areas. And then we'll have to very likely have these next generation governance institutions to really tackle the challenges that are in front of us. And just one last little comment on that in terms of the challenges. Someone talked about, the fear-based narratives to cooperation. Completely agree. We have to focus, like there's so much. John, you mentioned Star Trek. I'm not a Trekkie. I haven't watched a lot of Star Trek. I'm sure it's great. I probably would enjoy it. But in terms of, there's a very, very, very positive future for us if we just, follow the rational, science-based and also these collaborative different paths, getting our house in order across these various policy areas, working together, protecting the environment, which is, our life support system. So there's our immensely positive narratives, and we should all be, of course, emphasizing that again and again and again. However, we still have to understand the gravity of the challenges. We have to go to the depth of really the type of this new crisis that we're in terms of these planetary systems. So we kind of have to hold both at once. We have to understand that this is serious, but then there's so much that we can do, and there are indeed pathways, and we need to get going and work together in this spirit of collaboration with this, holding this very, very positive vision in our minds.
John, please.
Yeah,
provide
just
comment. Yeah.
briefly coming back to environment organizations and tying into an earlier presentation. So Andreas Bummel is obviously, of course, also reaching out to environment organizations because a UNPA would be helpful for them in achieving their goals. And after many years of work, he has got Greenpeace and the Nature Conservancy have signed up to the UNPA campaign. It's on the slide he showed earlier. So there is progress there, and they're very much on our radar. In the photo that Maja showed at the beginning of her presentation was Gia Bastido, who is a climate youth activist, Fridays for Futures, working with Greta Thunberg. So, there are links there as well. I would like to see Extinction Rebellion in the UK to stop demanding the UK is climate neutral in 10 minutes time and to start demanding that we do something about global governance. So this is something where everyone can help out. I mean, how do we communicate to the environment movement that the solution to their problems, the solution to pandas and polar bears is actually governance? And if we can get that message across and have the placards outside the gatherings demanding that we have governance that's effective, accountable, equitable, just, then we're on our way. And then when the people are moving, so a guy in New York told me, then the politicians can start to move. If there's demand from the people, the politicians feel licensed to take action to whatever you want to call it, full sovereignty.
Thank you for that, John. I think it's a really wonderful building off point. I couldn't have directed the conversation better. And I am really glad you brought up COP and perhaps some of the criticisms that have arose in recent years and how Mega does in fact have proposals that would address that. I want to address comments in the chat, but first I do want to ask, there's the relationship between how Mega plans to foster collaborations and partnerships among governments and international organizations, civil society, private sector, but there's also the political will, having the awareness at the citizen level, which John, you just brought up, and having people actually call for this. I'd love to hear a little bit about the strategy for additional partnerships and maybe even education campaigns. What is getting this topic, the gap in governance that Mega really addresses, in front of the public?
When you talk about political will, I'll jump in and I'll know to Maja. When you talk about political will, there's a quote from Friedman. I'm sorry, every presentation I want to go back to the same quote, so people will be fed up hearing it. But I mean, he said it takes a crisis to catalyze change. What's done in a crisis depends on the plans that are lying around at the time. And our job is to write the plan and keep it alive in the mind of policymakers until the politically impossible becomes a politically inevitable. So I don't think the catalyst for change is going to come about because we do such a wonderful job of educating people. I think it's fundamentally going to, although that is part of keeping the plan alive in people's minds, but this will need a catalyst. And 10 years ago, climate change didn't headline the news in the UK very often. Now I see climate change headlining the news over and over again. And the scientists are telling us things are moving a little faster than they anticipated. And there's a time lag in all of this climate change impacts. So we can be confident the impacts are going to ramp up dramatically going forward, which is good in the sense the catalyst is there. It's bad in the sense, it takes such a big catalyst to make things happen. But really, the political will is being generated now and again. As I've said, I have less experience in this field than my colleagues, and Maja has said to me at COP26, she feels the political will is building because people can see the problem. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to Maja.
Yes, and Erica, to your question about public engagement, indeed, it's very important, obviously. Also, because if you want to have sound governance, if you want to have also upgrades in governance, you need citizens around the world to understand the way that current international institutions function or don't function, and the theory behind new institutions in harmony with sound principles of governance that we can all commit to, that we can all feel very comfortable within, and recognize those values and those principles of governance legitimacy. So citizens should feel that their governments around the world are taking care of them, that they're looking out for the public good, that it's not partisan. Also, we need so many more leaders in every office of government, you know, who are really working towards technical, humane solutions for our really key challenges. And at the Climate Governance Commission, we work with our commissioners. In fact, some of them are policy think tanks, like the Club of Rome was mentioned in the chat, or one of our commissioners is the co-president of the Club of Rome. And indeed, they are interested in this governance issue just because they see that things are not happening. This is a real gap. And civil society organizations, of course, gets to populations to some extent, but we have wanted to collaborate with partners on global communications projects from the very beginning. And we already have a few projects in that respect in the works with some really incredible collaborators, actors. So I think the challenge is, as someone was saying earlier, kind of worried about the fear narratives, worried about partisan kind of concerns. It's like, no. We have to, again, we have to like educate ourselves on the planetary science, which is extraordinary. It's a very new system science, which is really about how the whole planet functions. The big biophysical systems. We're all interdependent. We're on this Earth where we have to now really actively tend to the systems that have kept human societies in this safe operating space. So I think the science is also very exciting. It's very, as John was saying, it's very, very, very worrying. We have to again realize this inflection point that we're at now, how urgent things are, but then we can calmly, again together and sort of help try to transmit information about the science, about these problems that we're confronting at the planetary level, and then getting these hopeful narratives and then realities. Let's just work together on these issues. Let's work together on these solutions. So I think one of the challenges, and again, we have these big aspirations for global communications through a very successful media company in the Netherlands, for example, and also very prominent documentary filmmakers. So we have top talent that wants to work on these things. But I think the challenge is, how do we get the messages out that properly inform, so everybody understands the situation and then stays updated, for example, in the science, because it is fast changing, um, but then also gets inspired and has some hope in terms of our capacity for collaboration, in terms of our capacity for good governance, because I think also that's part of the destructive nature of the very hyper partisanship we've seen across, for example, mature democracies, and of course other terrible trends across various countries. So I think for me this is also a project about trying to rebuild confidence in our shared governance, that it can serve the public good, and working together as citizens, but also as professionals, as diplomats, like really working together for a very, very positive history, positive future, positive future around shared goals in like a very exciting and harmonious way. I think we should also strive for harmony, and I think that's possible in the international, because this is, we work with unbelievably diverse actors, stakeholders from every sector, corporate stakeholders, uh, people from every region, indigenous groups, indigenous peoples, people from the global south, who have a colonial history that they're often angry about. We're talking together, we're working together, we're so enthusiastic about working together and finding solutions. So I think this is part of the messages we have to get out, and we have to also invite citizens to take up that mantle also of action and positivity and hope and collaboration, and these shared values to protect our common home. So
Yeah.
everybody has to also kind of pitch in and get excited and work together.
Yeah, my always sparks off thoughts in me. So I mean, like nationalism's had a good run of late. Obviously, MAGA's performing mega right now, and maybe it's the case. I mean, I don't know. It's possible that every sort of few decades, a world war is what humanity needs to remind itself of the benefit of not having a world war. I hope not, but it's possible. On the other hand, if you look at the fall of the Berlin Wall, that didn't take a massive war, and no one knew when that wall was going to come down. Even shortly beforehand, the people closest to it didn't know what was going to happen when. But pressure builds and builds and builds, and then when change comes, my word, it can come fast. And so, I think that's the world we're in. But you look at your generation, Erica, the generation of my children, they're all aligned. There's a huge common understanding of the mess the planet's in, and we know how to sort it out. We know how to govern effectively at a big level. We can try and avoid some of the mistakes that are made in some of the current mature democracies. We know what to do. Let's do it.
Thank you so much for that. You were a wonderful panelist. Really, you bounce off each other so naturally. I can tell you're, interact a lot through the steering committee. I did want to bring it to some of the proposals. I do want to get to that, but you've just both brought up two really important points I wanted to get to, which is the involvement of Indigenous stakeholders and youth. So I was wondering if you could highlight some of the ways that youth and Indigenous communities are specifically given platforms within MEGA. Is it through external collaboration? Is it at the start with the Climate Governance Commission's report?
Right. I'm not sure Maja is still there. So, I mean, I'm going to hand this over pretty much straight to Maja.
Okay.
I mean, she's I only jumped in, Maja, because you had disappeared off the screen. Otherwise, I mean, the commission, building the commission, this has been central to Maja's work. In terms of MEGA, we're just starting to build. So I'm going to hand to Maja.
Sure. Yes, I would say, I mean, Mega is still very young, and so we're just getting up and running, and everybody is welcome. We already have youth and regionally diverse. We haven't had any, as far as I know, John and Alan, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Indigenous per se organizations potentially join yet, but of course they are very welcome, and we will reach out actively as Mega gets up and running, because indeed we do really want Mega to be fully representative of as much as humanity as possible. And of course, Indigenous perspectives are absolutely vital in talking about rebuilding our relationship with natural systems. And so, indeed, as John mentioned, in the Climate Governance Commission, we've had consultations with Indigenous leaders, an Indigenous commissioner who's also a youth commissioner, and 3 youth commissioners, other youth experts who have informed our work and been working with us closely. We also work with other youth platforms. So that's, again, been interwoven and integral, and it will continue to be. And for example, with Mega, we've been talking to the Youth Negotiators Program, for example, where they have youth who are part of many delegations going to the climate COPs, and they want to help more broadly, even beyond COPs, in terms of these international governance reforms. So it will just be continuing, ongoing. And if you have any, specific organizations or people to recommend, let us know. We'd love to have those recommendations.
All right, then we'll move on to the proposals of MEGA. I saw Bob Flax again asked about your support of the Crime of Ecocide. So I know that you do in fact support the Crime of Ecocide. I know it's on your website. I saw Alan Ware responding to a lot of questions. Rebecca Shute, thank you so much for fielding so many of these really wonderful questions. I want to give you space to talk about the Crime of Ecocide, but I also want to broaden this and have you speak about some of the proposals you find to be the most salient under MEGA. So I know there's the anti-corruption court, environmental governance agency, a lot to speak on there. So feel free to jump in on what you find to be the most salient proposal that MEGA has going on. Maybe what has the most traction given how new the alliance is.
John, do you want to first give your thoughts on that? You don't have any opinions? No?
You go, it's your turn to go first, Maja. A little bit of gender balance and who speaks first.
Yeah, so in the Climate Governance Commission report last November, we broke down those near term, longer term, and some of those, for example, the near term proposals, there are other groups that perhaps are spearheading, like for the COP reform, the Club of Rome has done a lot of work on that, and they'll probably be leading that. We'll just support as much as we can. But I think that that is a very live issue, of course, because so much energy and attention is focused around the COPs. However, it's sort of like this balance between how much attraction can you get in existing processes, which already have, kind of their own momentum and inertia, versus, okay, really working hard on new institutions, which take the governance paradigm to another level. So because of those sort of dynamics, we'll be working on these near-term proposals, being opportunistic, being strategic, seeing where we can take steps forward in the existing system, but then also in parallel, working with the experts to develop those medium-term proposals. So those medium-term proposals are really important, I would say, and I think their time has come. In terms of a proper defragmented global environment agency with a judicial capacity, international court for the environment, however that will be designed. I think there has to be a lot of dialogue still on sort of the design features of such institutions, how they would work together. And also the international economic architecture is very much overdue for reform. That's also, of course, a very heavy lift. And there's ecological issues should be core to that rethink, but there's a multitude of other issues that will be relevant there. We also talk about international law in the medium term, and now how it has to shift again to take account of these call them global commons, call them the common heritage of humankind, which the Common Home of Humanity has proposed that this operating system that keeps us, safe, human civilization safe. The biophysical system should be the common heritage of humankind. So these legal shifts in the way that we think about our Earth system. So we could govern, for example, the software of the Earth system, the planetary boundaries, all these biophysical systems. We could govern that as an object in common, and then keep our sovereign state system, more or less. So anyways, those sort of conceptual shifts also I think are quite interesting for the medium term. The near term, mentioned, of course, trying to push COP to its maximum in terms of the effects they can have at the moment. But also a declaration of planetary emergency at the General Assembly, we think is important to focus the attention of the international community about really where we're at this inflection point in history and what the latest science is really saying, alongside potentially the convening of an emergency platform to consolidate international efforts, to coordinate them, to have much higher levels of efficacy in the international response as soon as possible, while we're trying to figure out these new institutions. So those are just a few. One more, I mentioned it in the presentation, but the international scientific capacity for monitoring and advice. We should have, at the intergovernmental level, sufficient and high enough level, very robust, scientific Earth system risk assessment and monitoring. Right now, we're flying into these really extreme risks, but we're flying mostly blind because we're thinking of older paradigms, and we're not scientifically at the international level caught up to where we need to be to stabilize the Earth system, to stabilize our situation. So that's another really important one. And there's, there are bits and pieces you can scan through the report at your leisure.
So I can reassure readers of the report that in my conversations with Maja and in the drafting process, I wasn't aware of Maja saying, "Oh, I'll chuck this in. It doesn't really matter, but let's put in some padding." So it's everything's in there for a reason, and it's all important. Where the World Federalist movement is headed in the longer term, or maybe sooner, but at some point, is democratic world federation. And for democratic world federation to be fully functional, we need the countries of the world to be democratic. And what we can't do with the environment is wait for China and Russia to become fully functioning democracies before we take action to look after the planet. So it's necessarily the case that we do what we can in the meantime. We hit the low-hanging fruit, we do the urgent things. So, for example, I've been to 3 COPs now, and they're just an absurd circus. And I mean, I'm not sophisticated and experienced maybe to gather all of the benefits of the COP process, but it sure as hell ain't an efficient governance process. So there are commissioners, as Maja mentioned, who are very keen to reform that COP process, turn it into an implementation process. That's something we can do sooner rather than later. Global governance reform as a whole is holistic. So if we get something that works for the environment, it'll work for peace. There are also work ongoing on revising the UN Charter, and there it's just like, add a parliament to the General Assembly, and you've got a bicameral body, and then you have councils doing stuff. And it's all quite, people say how complicated all this, but really, if you have sensible governance, you can govern. And governance itself is complicated, but putting the machinery in place is not that complex conceptually. One thing that occurs in the Climate Governance Commission report, where I perhaps have a slightly different emphasis, just to throw in a different view. I used to work in finance. I have buddies who work in hedge funds. I have buddies who trade oil because there's quite an opportunity to make profits because it's an unfashionable asset. Personally, I don't have much of a problem with that. I think it's up to government to regulate the corporate world. I think the really fundamental problem in the corporate world is it's globalized and the governance hasn't. So the corporate world can dance rings around the regulation because it's not coordinated at the global level.
Can I just interject? I just want to, on that note, it totally relates. It's a question from the chat, and then we'll have to wrap it up in about 2 minutes. But the question of capitalism has been brought up, and how Mega intends to reckon with some of the aspects of the system that are not interested in environmental reform and very interested in never-ending profits.
Right, I'll jump in, then I'll hand over to Maja to wrap up. So I think it's absolute nonsense that corporates are interested in never-ending profits, and corporate leaders are people, and people have children, and generally speaking, corporate leaders do care about the future. And I'm sure there are exceptions, and Putin personally may have an agenda that's different from most of us, but on the whole, the corporate world cares very much about the future. And basic structure of capitalism, as I understand it, and I'm no expert, is that people own companies, shareholders own companies, and managers manage them, and their job is to make profits for the owners. That's the basic structure. And the job of government is to manage the externalities and make the rules such that corporate activity serves the common good of humanity. And if you don't regulate capitalism, it's a disaster. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, the fundamental problem is that capitalism has globalized and regulation hasn't. Let's just globalize the regulation, have a minimum corporate tax, have a price on carbon, et cetera, et cetera.
We're going to have to shift to Maja, if it's okay. We just have 1 more minute before we have to conclude. Thank you so much, John.
In 1 minute, in terms of tackling, economic ideologies theory, a couple of quick points. I think now in the mainstream discussion in ecological expert advocacy circles, the economic paradigms are shifting, radically and quickly, and they're not ideologically labeled. When I think that's healthy. We're not like, oh, it's communism versus capitalism, or the ideological sort of trends. but anyways, we could talk about, what is commonly labeled capitalism and the nefarious parts of that. And I agree. I agree with John. Of course, we have to ensure we have proper international regulation and international law. But I also think that, of course, we failed at the national level to tame some of the really unhelpful predatory excesses in our economic systems, and the sort of extractive, wasteful ways of using resources and not respecting people, et cetera, et cetera. So I would just say that this is a very active, live, vibrant field in terms of discussing, what holistically should our economies look like at the national level, at the local level, at the international level. How do we rethink a lot of our defunct and outmoded theories? There's just a whole host of economic theory that is no longer fit for purpose. Maybe it never was. Maybe some of it was. So there's ecological economics, for example, which is now more and more mainstream. You have businesses.
Close it
just
now.
One last point.
Sure.
They're triple bottom line businesses that, according to their legal obligations, serve people, planet, and make a profit, but within a frame of ethical activity. So it's just a very active live field, and it's on the move.
Right.
Okay.
One thing is how we measure GDP, and another is I agree with Maja too.
Okay. Thank you so much for introducing Maja to a new audience.